Hello, 8th graders. So today we'll be talking about the section 8.3 in your textbooks. If you wish to follow along with me, you can start on page 450. Okay, and I'm just kind of going to go through and give you that summary and lecture. I should call it a discussion, not a lecture, like we have been doing. Okay. As a quick reminder before we get started, if you have not been checking your email or Power School, please make sure you are doing that. And by email, I mean your school email, okay? Because that is how your teachers are contacting you and staying in touch with you as things change. So please make sure you are doing that. To get started, okay, 8.3 kind of deals with the division and outbreak of war. So what division means is the country's going to split in two, okay? And then the outbreak of war means the war is going to start. So let's get right into that stuff, okay? It all starts with Abraham Lincoln winning the election of 1860, okay? So he runs for president and he wins, okay? The reason why he wins so easily, despite a few things, is because of this, okay? So Abraham Lincoln runs against, so it would be Stephen Douglas, okay, is going to be the Democrat nominee. And here's the problem with the Democrats during this time. The Northern and Southern Democrats did not get along. Okay, Southern Democrats wanted to keep slavery, where Northern Democrats did not. So therefore, the Democrats broke into two parties. All right, so Stephen Douglas represents the South. Okay, and then there were a few other, like John Bell also ran as part of a party. Okay, and there were a few other people running as well. John Breckinridge, okay, was the Southern Democrats' pick. Stephen Douglas was the Northern Democrats' pick. So the reason that Abraham Lincoln, who was a Republican, won so easily was because the Democrats were split into parties. So therefore, the people who usually voted Democrat voted for different people. Okay, so that made Abraham Lincoln be able to win really, really easy because anybody who voted Republican voted for Abraham Lincoln. Now, here's why it's so cool that Abraham Lincoln won so easily. Abraham Lincoln was not even on the ballot in 10 southern states, which means in 10 states in the South, you could not even vote for Abraham Lincoln. They didn't like him that much. But he still won handily. The reason why, and we'll talk more about this later, is because there's roughly 22 million people in the North and only 9 million in the South. That way, a lot more people were able to vote for Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln becomes president of the United States. As the South sees it, okay, this is the end of them being part of the United States. And the reason why is they think that because Abraham Lincoln, a Republican, remember Republicans are super against slavery expanding, is now in the White House, they feel that their chance to be heard and their way of life is going to be taken away from them. So they're pretty much set when Abraham Lincoln wins presidency that they will no longer be part of the United States. Okay? There were a few tries to try and save the nation at the last second. There were a few compromises that were made, okay? For example, one of the compromises was to expand the Missouri Compromise all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Remember, they had the Compromise of 1850 to adjust that. It did not go well, though. People did not approve of it because they were already angry, things like that. Okay, so therefore, it didn't work. Those last second tries to save and keep the country together. Okay, there was also a bill that was passed to make the Constitution unamendable, which means that you couldn't change the Constitution and therefore slavery would always be legal. That did not pass either. Okay, obviously, because we've amended the Constitution quite a few times, 27 to be exact. Okay, eventually, here's what happens. Okay, South Carolina, remember my rule of South Carolina, is the first state to break away. Following shortly after that, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas also broke away to form what they called the Confederate States of America. Okay, so they technically started their own country when they broke away from the United States. They chose Jefferson Davis to be the first president of Confederacy. Okay, so they are their now own country, or they think they are their own country. Okay, here's kind of the issue with this, and you can read about this on page 453. The South says that the Constitution and Declaration of Independence say that if the people that are being governed, which means citizens, no longer agree with their government, they have the right to overthrow it. Kind of like what we did when we broke away from Britain. Okay? Abraham Lincoln and the Union, on the other hand, said that sometimes you have to follow laws that you don't like, okay? And that you cannot break away to form your own country. He said that was not legal. Okay, so there's two differing opinions here. The South, Jefferson Davis, they believe that it's their right, that if the government does not represent them, they can break away and make their own country. And the North says, no, you cannot do that. Sometimes you have to follow rules that you don't like. Okay, so that's kind of the headbutting that we have going on right now. Okay, eventually war breaks out. President Lincoln takes office on March 4th, 1861. Okay, following that, the South pretty much has had enough. Okay, not only did they break away to form their own country, now they're going to start doing some other stuff as well. Okay, President Lincoln, when he's inaugurated, gives a speech where he says he wants to keep the country together, and the only way that a war is going to happen is if the South starts it. He will not start a war. Okay, that's what he says. All right. However, okay, the first inaugural address by Jefferson Davis says this. He says, so when Jefferson Davis becomes president of the Confederate States of America, so the South, that new country, he says that it is the people's right to have the government represent them, and that's why they broke away and formed their own country. So basically, these two men are appealing to their own groups. The northern president, Abraham Lincoln, is going to the North people, we need to be one country. Sometimes you have to follow rules you don't like. Slavery is bad, all this good stuff. Versus Jefferson Davis is saying, when he's the president of his new country, he's saying that it's the people's right to have the government represent them. If the government wants things that you don't, then it's not right for you to be in that country. So he's pretty much justifying the fact that they're no longer part of the United States. Okay, each one of them are doing a really good job at making their own people believe in them. Okay, in 1861, Lincoln finally faces war. Okay, what happens is, after the South breaks away, they start to take all those forts and military bases in the South. Okay, of course, the South was part of the United States at one time, so there are lots of military bases and federal land down there, which belongs to the government. They say, since we're now our own country, it belongs to us, right? Well, here's where President Lincoln runs into a problem. He says this: if I let the Southern people take these forts and federal land, I am pretty much admitting that they can be their own country, that we have no power, right? If he lets those people just take that land over and those forts, he pretty much let them be their own country. He gave in to them. So he says, I can either I can send our military to defend our forts and take our land back, that Confederate States, and start a war, or I can concede and let these people take federal land and forts, which makes it makes him look weak, and it pretty much says that the South is now its own country because the North is not willing to fight for its forts. Okay? So he has a choice to make. Well, the South goes on to take a lot of forts and federal land, almost all of them, in fact, in the South. Okay? The only three that they do not control are a couple off the Florida coast, and then the one in Fort Sumter in South Carolina, which is right in the Charleston Harbor, which is right off the coast of South Carolina. Okay, those are the three that the North still controls in the South. Now, they're starting to run low on food at Fort Sumter, so President Lincoln says, I'm going to send my people food, but I'm not going to send soldiers, I'm not going to send weapons, etc., so don't attack us, okay? Well, the South decides to attack anyways, okay? So they attack Fort Sumter, which is off the coast of South Carolina. The Robert Anderson, who is the general at the base, okay, I believe he was a general. I don't want to, he's a military commander. We'll just give him that, okay. He says that he will not surrender until he is either out of food, out of ammunition, or is forced to surrender by the United States government. Well, the battle goes on long enough that eventually Robert Anderson does have to surrender. They ran out of ammunition and they ran out of food. So therefore he surrenders to the South, and the South takes that base over, okay. Which leads us pretty much, we're in the middle of the Civil War now, right? Because President Lincoln tried to defend that base and the South took it anyway. So that pretty much starts the Civil War. Okay. Taking sides, states have to decide now which side they're on. Are you part of the Union, which is in the North, or are you part of the Confederate States, which is the South? Okay. Well, as you can see on that map on page 456, which states joined who? Okay. So pretty much anything from Kansas, Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia up became part of the Union. Anything from Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, Texas down became part of the Confederacy. Okay, so you pretty much have your two sides decided now. There are a couple of what they call border states. So states like Missouri, Kentucky, and West Virginia, along with Maryland and Delaware, are states that stayed part of the Union. So they stayed with the North, but slavery is still allowed there. Okay. A little later, next section, we'll get to what is called the Emancipation Proclamation, which is the document that President Lincoln made that freed slaves. Okay, when he made this document and signed it, it actually only applied to states that were not in the Union. Okay, so those states in the South, like Texas, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, etc., he said that they can no longer have slaves. Those states that had slaves that stayed part of the Union, so states like Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, okay, they had slaves, but they were part of the North. He said you can keep your slaves for now. Think about why he might do that, right? Why does President Lincoln ban slavery in states that are in the South, but not ban slavery in his own states? Because if he did that, those states probably leave, right? They probably join the South. So he's like, I want to keep these states, so I'm going to let slavery stay legal in my own states. Okay? That's just, well, it's kind of hypocritical. It's probably the smart thing to do on his part. Okay? Strengths and weaknesses of the North going into this battle. Let's talk about some of those. Okay? The South's strengths at home and economic limitations. So here's what the South has going for it. The North has to attack the South, right? Because if the South says, if nobody attacks us, we're just going to be our own country. That's just how it's going to happen. Okay, we're not going to start this war, but if nobody attacks us, we don't have to attack because we already broke away. So naturally, the North has to attack the South in order to take it back. Well, what's the disadvantage of that? The Southern people are fighting on their home turf. They know the land. They have a sense of pride, right? If those people in the South are fighting for their way of life, okay, they're fighting because slavery is how they make their money. That's where their home is, all that stuff. So it means more to them. Versus the people in the North are fighting just to keep the Union together, okay, because the president told them so. So that's kind of the motivational factors that the South have going for it at that time. Okay, they do have some weaknesses in the South, though. For example, their economy was largely based on agriculture, which is farming. It's really hard to farm during a war, okay, with all the fires and bombshells and all that good stuff. Okay, it's really difficult. Also, they do not have many factories in the South at all, so making things like guns, boots, bullets, etc., uniforms, okay, very, very difficult for the South. Their transportation is not good, so their train system, not good, right? They don't connect their railroad tracks, so it's really hard to move things like food and ammunition and weapons, okay? So the South does have some not good things going for them at this time, okay? The North, on the other hand, does have all those factories, so they can make lots of ammunition and lots of weapons and lots of boots and lots of uniforms and lots of stuff to carry things, all that good stuff. Their infrastructure is much better, which means the railroads they have are 10 times better than those in the South. So they can move things really fast. However, disadvantages the North has, okay? They're trying to fight the South in the South, so they don't know the land, okay? Also, the South has really, really good generals like Robert E. Lee, okay? In the North, while they don't have bad generals, okay, does not have nearly as good of leadership, including President Lincoln himself. President Lincoln was a new president, so he did not have much experience leading. He had never been in a war. He did not fight in the army or anything like that, or any military branch. While on the other hand, Jefferson Davis, who was the president of the South, the Confederate States, had served during the Mexican Cession. Okay, so he was a general in the United States Army. He went to West Point, which is the Army Academy. Okay, he was very experienced and very smart, and he had really good generals like Robert E. Lee and some other ones like that we'll talk about, General Jackson, things like that. Okay. So the South does have some advantages, while they have some major disadvantages, and the same thing for the North. The North has some major advantages, and they also have some big disadvantages. So it's actually relatively equal in the sense that the South has way more experience, but not as nearly as many supplies, where the North has way more supplies, but not nearly as good of experience. Okay. Also, the population will come into effect. There's about 22 million people in the North and 9 million in the South. So therefore, the North will have a lot more soldiers than the South will have. Okay? If you have questions about anything that I have talked about today, because that was a lot of information that I just flew through leading up to the Civil War, either feel free to rewatch this video or email me, set up a time to talk, any of that good stuff, right? Make sure you're reading the section. Go back and answer those questions if you have or haven't. Look at your guided readings. Make sure you have all those turned in. They are worth points. Make sure your friends are doing okay, all that good stuff, all right? I hope you're staying healthy, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.